This incredible photograph shows Kay Francis, aged just 20, the day before her first ever trip to Paris in 1925. While in the City of Light, the young American would become a revelation, and from then on, her life would turn into a thrilling roller coaster of Hollywood fame, wild parties, and an astonishing collection of lovers ranging from her big-name co-stars to nobility and even to German spies. It was quite a ride for a girl born to a broken home in Oklahoma, and while the highs were among the highest, the lows were just as taking, not least the tragedy of her ghost-like final years. Before we delve into the rise and fall of this legendary icon, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching this video from. Sit back with a drink in hand as we journey back in time to an era where light shone brightly, but tragedies were even darker. To truly understand the heartbreaking Hollywood tragedy of Kay Francis, one must look beyond the silk gowns and the perfectly lit studio portraits. One must look back to a dusty hotel in Oklahoma City at the turn of the 20th century. The legend of Kay Francis, as carefully constructed by the studio publicity machines, painted her as a debutante, a woman born into high society who drifted into acting out of boredom. This was a lie. In reality, her story began with a familiar backdrop for early 20th century actresses: a broken home, financial instability, and a desperate need to escape. She was born Catherine Gibbs on Friday the 13th of January, 1905. The date itself seemed like an omen for a life that would be defined by extreme luck and equally extreme misfortune. Her birthplace was a hotel managed by her father, Joseph Gibbs. But Joseph was not the pillar of stability that a young girl needed. He was a man far more skilled at squandering his family wealth and drowning his sorrows in alcohol than at finding success or being a parent. He stayed just long enough to see his daughter take her first steps, only to vanish soon after, leaving a void that Kay would spend the rest of her life trying to fill with an astonishing collection of lovers. The departure of her father left Kay in the care of her mother, Catherine Clinton. Catherine was a theater actress, though never a major star, who worked tirelessly under her maiden name to keep food on the table. Unlike many women of that era who viewed marriage as an exit strategy from the workforce, Catherine could not afford to leave her career behind. Acting was her only steady income. This reality turned little Katie, as she was known then, into a child of the backstage. She grew up watching her mother perform, absorbing the artificiality of the theater world before she even understood the real world. However, this was not a warm, nurturing environment. The financial hardships of her early life instilled in Kay a deep-seated fear of poverty, a trait that would later make her notoriously careful with her finances even when she was the highest-paid woman in Hollywood. But more than money, she lacked stability. She did not dream of following in her mother's footsteps initially. Instead, she was shipped off to boarding schools, receiving her education in institutions that served as cold substitutes for a family home. It was here, in the lonely corridors of these schools, that the primal wound of abandonment began to fester. She was a girl named after her mother, but with an A instead of an E, a small distinction for a child who felt like a secondary character in her parents' dramatic lives, as Kay transitioned from a lonely child into a young woman. Biology began to reveal its double-edged sword. She inherited her mother's dark, striking features, but from her absent father, she received a mysterious, easy charm and a towering height that would later make her a fashion icon. But she also inherited something far more dangerous from Joseph Gibbs, his darker character traits. As an adult, Kay would reflect his predisposition for heavy drinking and a profound difficulty in maintaining lasting relationships. The seeds of the scandals that would later rock the golden age of Hollywood were sown right there in her DNA by the time she was 16. The teenage Kay Francis was already looking for a way out. She attended a secretarial school, which was coincidentally named the Catherine Gibbs School, and soon after graduating, she began working. She tried her hand at modeling for advertisements in New York magazines, But her most pivotal early job was as an assistant to a social planner. This position was her gateway to a world she had been excluded from, the world of wealthy elites and eligible young men. It was here that she met Dwight Francis. Dwight seemed like the perfect escape. He came from a rich family, offering the financial security Kay had always craved. But in a cruel twist of fate, Kay found herself marrying a mirror image of her father. Dwight shared Joseph Gibbs's womanizing and drinking habits. They married in December 1922, just a month shy of her 18th birthday. It was a union born of desperation and youthful naivety. The couple split their time between a quiet apartment in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and a Manhattan apartment on West 49th Street. While Kay enjoyed the peaceful life in Pittsfield, the siren call of the city was too strong. She preferred the excitement of New York, where she frequented plays and concerts, immersing herself in the cultural heartbeat of the Roaring Twenties. But the marriage was doomed from the start. After just over 2 years, Dwight's wandering eye and Kay's growing disinterest led to their separation, in a surprising show of support. Her in-laws, who blamed their son for the breakup, funded a vacation in Europe for Kay. The primary aim of this trip was to secure a quick divorce in Paris, where the courts required no grounds or proof. Unlike in the United States, this trip in 1925 would become the defining moment of her youth. It was not just a legal procedure, it was a metamorphosis. In the City of Light, the 20-year-old Kay Francis, tall, dark, and strikingly beautiful, stood out among the locals and fellow expatriates. For 6 months, she indulged in the Parisian nightlife, frequenting the chicest clubs and enjoying the free and easy romantic encounters that the French capital was famous for. It was a period of intense liberation. She discovered the power of her own allure, and perhaps more ominously, she deepened her relationship with alcohol. However, the party could not last forever. On her journey back to America, still riding the wave of excitement but dangerously low on funds, Kay Francis faced a crossroads. She had tasted the high life, and she refused to go back to being a secretary. She decided she would do whatever was necessary to continue her life of excitement. She wanted to dress in the latest Paris fashions and mingle with glamorous people. She realized that there was only one profession that would allow a girl with no money but an abundance of style to do both acting. Upon her arrival in New York, she was determined. Her looks and the society connections she had made while working for the social planner helped her set up meetings with producers. While in Paris, she had befriended influential figures like Vogue editor Margaret Case, who encouraged her to pursue the stage, drawing on the familiarity with the theater she had learned from her mother. She began to audition. She was no longer just Catherine Gibbs or Mrs. Dwight Francis. She was constructing a new identity, one that would eventually conquer the silver screen. After some initial setbacks, she landed a minor role in an avant-garde Broadway production of Hamlet. To get the part, she lied. She convinced the producer she had played Ophelia, a role she had only performed in a boarding school play. This small deception was the first of many masks she would wear. The play was a hit, and although her role was minor, it was the first step on a ladder that would lead her to the dizzying heights of stardom, and eventually, to the depths of a classic Hollywood tragedy. The girl from Oklahoma had officially entered the arena, unaware that the bright light she coveted would eventually burn her. If the journey to Paris was Kay Francis's personal awakening, her arrival on Broadway was her professional baptism by fire. But the transition from a socialite dabbling in theater to one of the biggest old Hollywood stars was not paved with truth. It was built on a calculated lie. When she sought a role in a modern dress production of Hamlet in 1925, she looked producer Al Woods in the eye and claimed she had played Ophelia before. It was a brazen fabrication. Her only experience with the role had been in a school play. Yet, this deception worked. It was the first indication that Kay Francis possessed the essential skill for survival in show business, the ability to construct a convincing mask. Her performance in Hamlet led to other stage roles. But it was Walter Houston who handed her the golden ticket to immortality. Houston, looking for a leading lady for his first talking picture, Gentleman of the Press, 1929, set his sights firmly on Kay. She played Myra May, a vampish character, a role that would haunt her career for years. Interestingly, Kay initially resisted the call of Hollywood. She argued that California was too far away and only agreed after 2 weeks of persuasion because she desperately needed the money. This reluctance to embrace the movie capital set her apart. Unlike the starlets desperate for fame, Kay viewed it as a job, a lucrative means to an end. When she finally arrived at the train station in Los Angeles, Paramount Pictures was ready. They had already crafted an image for her, a chic, sophisticated star from the legitimate theater, designed to rival the best-dressed actresses of the era. The transformation of Katharine Gibbs into the icon Kay Francis began immediately. Legend has it that Clara Bow, the it girl herself, suggested Kay shorten her name for better marketing, though records show Kay had experimented with the name before. More importantly, Bow taught her the technical art of screen acting. "If you'll cheat over just a little, you'll get in it just right too," Bow told her, teaching Kay how to steal the scene by keeping her face in the camera. However, the studio system of pre-code Hollywood was not just about acting lessons. It was a factory that manufactured personas, standing at 5 feet 9 inches. Kay was significantly taller than most of her contemporaries. Paramount and later Warner Brothers weaponized this height, turning her into a clothes horse, a living mannequin for the era's most exquisite fashions. While audiences marveled at her ability to wear clothes with unmatched dignity, Kay resented the label. She worked closely with designer Ori Kelly to use fashion as character development. If she played a villain, she demanded frilly, sweet clothes to create an ironic contrast. For a noble woman, she chose tailored, sophisticated outfits. This was a brilliant subversive act, proving she was a thinking actress trapped in a superficial mold. But the glamour of classic cinema often concealed physical brutality. The most harrowing example occurred on the set of Street of Chance, 1930. Director John Cromwell, inexperienced with film lighting, failed to realize the danger of the intense arc lights used for close-ups. For a day and a half, Kay stared into these burning lights without complaint, not wanting to disrupt the production. The result was catastrophic. When it was over, tears came streaming down my face. She recalled she had to spend 10 days in a dark room, and her eyes were permanently damaged. This injury forced her to wear medicated dark glasses for the rest of her life, inadvertently creating her signature mysterious look off-camera. It was a cruel irony. The very lights that made her a star had blinded her, despite the physical toll. Kay's rise was unstoppable. Her chemistry with William Powell was electric, leading to several successful collaborations like One Way Passage and Jewel Robbery. But her artistic zenith came in 1932 with Ernst Lubitsch's Trouble in Paradise. This film remains a masterpiece of the Golden Age, and Kay's involvement in it showcased her dedication to her craft over her personal happiness. She had been scheduled to leave for her honeymoon with her third husband, Kenneth McKenna. When the offer came, the salary was enormous, $26,000, but Kay insisted the money didn't matter. She canceled her honeymoon to work with the genius Lubitsch, later writing that the experience compensated for the lost trip in Trouble in Paradise. Kay Francis was radiant, witty, and heartbreakingly human. It was the role she was born to play, far removed from the one-dimensional vamp she often suffered through. Critics and historians agree that Lubitsch brought out the best in her. For a brief moment, the mask of the fashion plate slipped, revealing a comedian and tragedian of immense depth. She was at the summit of Hollywood, the highest-paid queen of the lot. But in the ruthless narrative of a Hollywood tragedy, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. The studio machinery that built her up was already gearing to tear her down, and the cracks in her personal life were beginning to widen. By the mid-1930s, Kay Francis had reached the pinnacle of her profession. She was the queen of the lot at Warner Brothers, earning a staggering salary that eclipsed even the legendary Bette Davis. However, in the treacherous landscape of old Hollywood stars. Reaching the top often meant you were simply the easiest target to shoot down. The conflict that ensued between Kay and her studio remains one of the most sordid chapters in cinema history. A true Hollywood tragedy of corporate cruelty designed to break a woman's spirit. The turning point came with a label that no actor could easily survive: box office poison. Along with Greta Garbo and Marlene Dietrich, Kay was branded as commercially toxic by theater owners. For Warner Brothers, a studio known for its ruthlessness, this was the signal to discard her. But there was a problem. Kay had a watertight contract. She was earning $5,250 a week, a fortune during the Great Depression, and she refused to quit. "I'm going to be a good girl and do everything I'm told," she declared, determined to collect every cent she was owed, viewing it as compensation for the years she had given to the industry. In retaliation, the studio executives devised a plan of calculated humiliation. Since they could not fire her, they decided to force her out by destroying her career from the inside. A former employee described this campaign as one of the more sordid chapters in our history. They assigned her to B-movies with dreadful scripts, hoping the embarrassment would drive her away. She was cast in films like Women in the Wind and King of the Underworld. Productions so lackluster that critics noted the studio seemed to be trying to sabotage her career. One critic astutely observed, "If Vitagraph wants to kill off Kay Francis, they are doing a swell job of it." The humiliation was not just professional, it was personal. In a final, petty act of degradation during her last week at the studio, Warner Brothers stripped Kay of her personal dressing room, a standard perk for any star, let alone one of her stature. She was forced to use the main dressing room with the extras, yet with a dignity that defined her screen persona. Kay endured it all until her contract expired on September 28, 1938. She walked away a millionaire, but the classic cinema icon was internally shattered, her reputation in tatters, while the studio system was grinding her down professionally. Kay's private life was a whirlwind of golden age scandal and private demons. Behind the polished image of the fashion plate lay a woman struggling with deep-seated insecurities and a voracious appetite for distraction. Her diaries from this period reveal a startlingly untold story of promiscuity and substance abuse. She meticulously documented her sexual encounters, often with a clinical detachment that masked her loneliness. She wrote of an encounter with director Eddie Goulding, studiously listing the new techniques she uncovered during their meeting. Her search for love was frantic and often self-destructive. Her marriage to Kenneth McKenna, which began in 1931, quickly devolved into a nightmare of incompatibility and abuse. Kenneth, frustrated by his own career failures, took his anger out on Kay. She recorded in her diary that he hit her during a heated argument in March 1932. The divorce in 1934 was swift, granted in just 3 minutes. But it left Kay more cynical than ever. She filled the void with a string of lovers, including the famous French entertainer Maurice Chevalier. Her diary entries about him were brutally honest. Had merciless afternoon with Maurice, 4 times in 2 hours. Yet, even this passion faded into boredom, with Kay dismissing his suggestions for a threesome as not practical. Underlying these fleeting romances was a dangerous reliance on alcohol. Kay Francis was a functioning alcoholic, a common but often hidden affliction among old Hollywood stars. Her diary is littered with references to getting very drunk and suffering from blackouts. At a dinner party at Gloria Swanson's home, she became so intoxicated she behaved poorly and had to apologize the next morning. This coping mechanism, combined with the stress of her career, created a volatile mix. She even noted experimenting with heroin in May 1934, a chilling detail that highlights how close she lived to the edge. But the true climax of her personal tragedy arrived in the form of a romance that played out like a spy thriller. In 1937, she met Baron Raven Erich Barnekow, a German aristocrat and World War I pilot. It was one of her most dangerous liaisons. They fell in love deeply, with Kay baptizing her library floor with their intimacy. For a moment, it seemed Kay had found her soulmate. However, as the world marched toward World War II, dark rumors began to swirl. Eric was accused of being a Nazi spy. The accusations were not entirely baseless. Eric had met with senior Luftwaffe officers and had been under FBI surveillance for an alleged fascination with poisonous gases. The pressure became unbearable as war broke out in Europe. Eric abruptly left Hollywood and returned to Germany, leaving Kay shocked and heartbroken. The true story of his fate was something Kay likely never knew. Eric, a reluctant participant in the Nazi regime who refused to serve under certain commanders, eventually lost all hope. On December 12, 1941, just days after America entered the war, the love of Kay Francis's life walked into the woods on his family estate and shot himself. The loss of Eric Barnekow was the final blow to Kay's emotional resilience. She had fought the studio system and survived, albeit with scars. She had navigated a maze of broken marriages and empty affairs. But losing Eric to the madness of war broke something inside her that could not be fixed. As the 1940s dawned, the once great Kay Francis was adrift, her career in decline and her heart shattered, setting the stage for the slow, ghost-like fade of her final years. The machinery of Hollywood had chewed her up, and history was beginning to forget her. The post-war years were merciless to Kay Francis. The woman who had once commanded the highest salary in Hollywood was now reduced to grinding through grueling stage tours in the American Midwest. The glamour of classic cinema had evaporated, replaced by a string of one-night stands in small towns and lonely hotel rooms in Illinois and Indiana. She was no longer a queen. She was a working actress trying to outrun her fading relevance. During the war, she had found some purpose working with the USO, where she shocked fellow actress Myrna Loy by using four-letter words and connecting with soldiers on a gritty, real level, but without a war to fight or a studio to battle. Kay Francis began to fight herself. This decline culminated in a bizarre and near-fatal incident in January 1948 that read like a dark noir script while touring with the play State of the Union in Columbus, Ohio. Kay was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The police arrived to find a scene of chaos. Kay was semi-conscious, suffering from severe burns, and surrounded by half-empty bottles of scotch. Her lover at the time, producer Howard Graham, was taken into custody for questioning regarding attempted murder. The press salivated over what looked like a sordid Golden Age scandal. However, the untold story was far sadder than any crime drama. Kay had not been attacked. She had simply overdosed on sleeping pills while battling a severe cold and exhaustion in her medicated stupor. She had collapsed against a hot radiator, burning her legs from her knees to her hips. The image of the once immaculate fashion icon lying helpless and burned in a hotel room was a devastating symbol of her fall, humiliated by the headlines and the physical pain. Kay retreated further into the shadows. By the 1950s, the new medium of television was offering a lifeline to many fading old Hollywood stars. But Kay refused to grab it. "Women look too darn old on it," she remarked with characteristic bluntness, terrified that the unforgiving camera would reveal the ravages of time and alcohol. Instead, she chose to vanish. She split her time between a summer rental in Cape Cod and an apartment on 64th Street in Manhattan. Becoming a recluse in the heart of the city, her isolation was punctuated by disturbing public displays of her private demons. The alcohol abuse that had plagued her career spiraled out of control. Beatrice Stewart recounted a heartbreaking afternoon finding Kay intoxicated and weeping in the fur department of Bergdorf Goodman. In a pathetic attempt to soothe her own pain, Kay purchased a mink stole before stumbling home to sober up. She had become a Hollywood tragedy in real time, a wealthy woman with a closet full of furs but a life empty of meaning. Friends like Charles Baskerville eventually stopped inviting her to dinner, unable to watch her fall down or embarrass herself in public. In 1966, she turned down a final offer to play a villainess in Madam X, a role that went to Constance Bennett. Kay knew her body was failing. Years of heavy smoking and drinking had taken their toll. She underwent surgeries to remove a kidney and part of a lung, and was eventually diagnosed with terminal breast cancer. The final act of Kay Francis played out in a hospital-style bed set up in her New York apartment. There were no cameras, no fans, and no applause. She would wake in the middle of the night in a state of terror and clarity, calling the few friends she had left in tears, desperate for a human voice. On August 26, 1968, at the age of 63, the star passed away. Her death was as quiet as her life had been loud. In a final, cynical, yet poignant gesture, she left her enormous fortune, more than $1 million, to a charity for seeing eye dogs. She left nothing to the people of her past. In the end, the Queen of Warner Brothers decided that dogs were the only creatures on Earth that had never betrayed her. When we look back at the life of Kay Francis, the contrast between the luminous figure on the silver screen and the solitary woman who died in a darkened New York apartment is devastating. She was the ultimate fabrication of the studio system, a woman marketed not for her soul, but for her silhouette. Hollywood sold her to the public as a clothes horse, a dehumanizing label that reduced a talented actress to a mere mannequin for Ori Kelly gowns. We are drawn to this Hollywood tragedy because it exposes the terrifying fragility of fame. Kay traded her privacy and her identity for a level of wealth that, in the end, could not purchase companionship or peace. She spent 10 years accumulating serious money to buy freedom, only to find that when she finally had it, she had no one to share it with. Her story forces us to ask, what is the value of being the highest-paid woman in the world, if the price is your own humanity? It would be easy to dismiss Kay Francis as the architect of her own demise, citing her alcoholism and chaotic love life. But that would be ignoring the untold story of systemic abuse. Her downfall was not an accident. It was an execution orchestrated by Warner Brothers, the studio's treatment of Kay, forcing a top-tier star into humiliating B-movies and listing her as box office poison. Remains a scathing indictment of how classic cinema moguls treated women. Once a woman dared to age or demanded her worth. The machinery that built her up turned its gears to crush her. Kay's difficult reputation was simply the label given to a woman who refused to break her contract. Her tragedy is a mirror to the ruthless nature of show business, where loyalty is non-existent and stars are discarded the moment their shine begins to fade. However, let us not remember Kay Francis merely as a victim. We must remember her as she was in Trouble in Paradise. Witty, sophisticated, and undeniably brilliant. She brought a unique, husky-voiced vulnerability to the screen that modern Hollywood has never quite managed to replicate. She was a survivor who navigated the treacherous waters of the Golden Age with her head held high, even when the studios tried to force it down. In her final act, Kay left us one last clue to her true character. She bequeathed her fortune to train seeing eye dogs, serving the only creatures she felt had never betrayed her. It was a final, silent commentary on the human connections she craved but never found. Kay Francis was more than a forgotten star. She was a woman who gave everything to the light, only to be left in the dark. The